Just after midnight, December 15th, 1900, the steamship Arctur passed through the dark waters of the North Atlantic. The sea was rough, but obviously not unusual for this part of the world. The crew had made this journey plenty of times before. But as the ship approached the Flannan Isles, something wasn't right. Ahead, standing on the highest point of the island, should have been a brilliant white lighthouse beam, sweeping across the water every 30 seconds. It was pretty impossible to miss. But on that dark, stormy night, there was nothing. The captain made note of it in his log, assuming there was some sort of mechanical issue. There wasn't much else he could do. The weather was worsening, and the ship continued on. No one on board could have imagined that that missing light was only the beginning. Because by the time anyone reached that lighthouse, every keeper would be gone. Never any bodies, never any explanation. Okay, hello out there, I hope we're all well. I hit 250 of you recently. That's so exciting. I know that's objectively not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but in the little scheme of things, it's a lot to me, so thank you for my 250 people. Now, if you like strange, unbelievable stories, internet culture mysteries, or the weird corners of history, then subscribe, or don't, I'm not a beggar, but I will win you over eventually. Tonight, we're heading to one of the most isolated places off the coast of Scotland, a cluster of tiny islands surrounded by unforgiving cliffs and endless ocean. But we need to go back to the very beginning. For centuries, sailors dreaded the waters surrounding the Flannan Isles. They're little more than rocky cliffs jutting out of the Atlantic, constantly battered by crashing waves, dense fog, and powerful winds. Even today, they feel completely isolated. There are no permanent villages, just seabirds, steep cliffs, and the sound of the ocean echoing against ancient rock. Now, the largest island has an eerie history all on its own. Long before the lighthouse was built on it, shepherds visited the island only briefly to graze sheep. According to local folklore, they refused to stay overnight. Some believe the islands were home to mysterious sea spirits. Others felt like there was something just uneasy about the place, a heaviness that's difficult to explain. Whether those stories hold any truth or not, the Flannan Isles had earned an eerie reputation long before the events we're about to get to. The cliffs surrounding the islands were nearly invisible during storms or heavy fog. Countless ships came dangerously close to smashing against the rocks. As maritime traffic increased during the 19th century, the Northern Lighthouse Board decided something had to be done. So construction of the lighthouse began in 1895 to the dismay of the locals, who warned that building on the island would unleash the wrath of these sea spirits who had made it their home. Nevertheless, the work went on, and it was no small task. Everything, every stone, every piece of equipment had to be transported by boat to an island with virtually no natural harbor. Workers had to carve stairways directly into the cliffs and haul these giant blocks up to the worksite. After several years of work, it officially entered service on December 7th, 1899. Standing nearly 75 feet tall, the lighthouse's lantern sat high above the sea, its light visible for over 20 miles. Now, to keep it operating required a small team of lighthouse keepers. 3 men would be stationed on the island, while another relief keeper remained on the mainland, and they would rotate out every few weeks. And their home was attached to the lighthouse, from what I understand. Listen, I am not a seafaring person, okay? I'm an inside cat. I don't really know the inner mechanisms of a lighthouse. Anyway, life was not luxurious. 3 men lived together in extremely close quarters. They maintained the machinery, cleaned the lenses, recorded weather observations, maintained supplies, and most importantly, never, ever let that light go out. Even one missed night could mean disaster for ships trying to navigate those waters. By all accounts, the work was lonely. Weeks could pass with only seabirds as company. And you can imagine standing out there during a storm. Nothing but black ocean stretching to every horizon, and wind gnawing at the cliffs. No neighboring lights, just an almost liminal isolation. the kind that's real difficult to imagine today. Then came December 1900. The three keepers on duty were Principal Keeper James Duquette, Assistant Thomas Marshall, and Occasional Keeper Donald MacArthur. Now, MacArthur was an interesting choice. He wasn't a full-time lighthouse keeper, but was filling in for a sick assistant. He was described as someone with a fiery personality who often found himself in altercations. Despite their different personalities, nothing unusual happened in the first days of December. But then on December 15th, the Arctur passed without seeing the light. The captain reported this to the Northern Lighthouse Board, who sent a relief ship, the Hesperus. It was supposed to arrive on December 20th, but was delayed because of bad weather. But finally, at noon on December 26th, lighthouse tender Hesperus reached the island. As the ship approached, something immediately felt wrong. Normally, one of the keepers would be waiting near the landing platform. No one was there, the flag wasn't flying. The ship sat there in the water, sounding its horn, waiting for someone to come out, but there was nothing. They fired a distress flare, still nothing. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, climbed the long staircase towards the lighthouse alone. The island was eerily silent. When he reached the building, he found the main gate and the door closed. Inside, everything looked almost ordinary. The kitchen showed signs that a meal had been interrupted. One chair was reportedly overturned, like someone had knocked it over in a panic. But there was not a single keeper anywhere in sight. Moore would later say, "I did not take time to search further, for I only too well knew something serious had occurred." So he went back to the ship and called on the crew to help him search for the men. Inside, the beds had been slept in, and all of the clocks had mysteriously stopped, which we'll get to later. 2 sets of oilskin rain gear, the 1900s equivalent to raincoats essentially, were missing. One remained hanging inside, which suggested 2 men went outside wearing waterproof clothing, while one didn't even bother to put his on. Maybe he was in a hurry. And that was odd. Lighthouse regulations discouraged all keepers from leaving the station at once. Someone has to stay behind and watch the light. So why would all 3 leave? Outside, they searched the cliffs. There was nothing. The 3 men had just vanished. But they inspected the western landing platform and found evidence of severe storm damage. A storage box had been smashed against the rocks with its contents scattered. Iron railings had been bent and twisted. The railway used to transport supplies had been ripped out of the concrete. Grass growing more than 200 feet above sea level had been ripped away. It's obvious the sea had reached monstrous heights. On December 29th, Robert Muirhead began an official investigation. Now, he was the Lighthouse Board superintendent and had personally recruited all 3 men. He was able to piece together that Marshall and Duquette had gone out with their raincoats, but Donald MacArthur had left his behind. Also, Marshall had been fined and scolded probably for not securing equipment properly, resulting in things being washed away. Muirhead's official explanation was that 2 of the men, probably Marshall and Duquette, had gone to the western landing to secure that box of supplies as to not be scolded again when a rogue wave washed them away. Hi, future editing me here. I know what you're thinking, just what about the 3rd guy? Well, I allegedly, reportedly forgot to film this line, but essentially he says that MacArthur probably heard/saw something, rushed out to help, and met the same fate. Okay, glad we could clear this up. Let's continue. It certainly sounds plausible. The ocean around the Flannan Isles is incredibly violent. Even experienced sailors have been caught off guard there. But, like every good mystery, we can't be certain. So now we come to the famous lighthouse logbook. According to later accounts, entries apparently written by Marshall described unusually severe storms in the days before the disappearance. One supposedly mentioned that James Duquette was very quiet. Another claimed Donald MacArthur, known for being volatile and getting into fistfights, was crying. So I'm going to read a few to you. December 12th, 1900. Gale north by northwest, sea lash to fury, storm still raging, severe winds, the likes of which I had never seen before. December 13th, 1900. Storm continued through the night. Wind shifted west by north. Duquette, quiet. MacArthur, praying. December 14th, 1900. No relief. Storm still raging. Sea rough. Prayers all day. December 15th, 1900. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. That final entry is haunting. It feels like a sense of submission. It's pretty creepy. But unfortunately, this is the part of the video where I have to poke some holes in the story and ruin all the fun, so sorry. Modern historians aren't convinced these logbook entries ever even existed. Many researchers now believe they were made up years later by newspapers or authors trying to make the story even more dramatic, as they do. And the uneaten meal and overturned chair were dramatized by a 1912 ballad called Flannan Isles by poet Wilfred Gibson. Joseph Moore himself said that the dishes were actually clean, leading him to believe that the men had disappeared sometime after dinner. In terms of the clocks mysteriously stopping, it was 1900. Clocks had to be wound back then, or guess what would happen. But even after weeding out all of that, 3 men are still missing. So what actually happened? Well, of course, there are theories abound. Some plausible, some a little out there. The first, of course, is the supernatural theory. Some believe that the keepers encountered these mysterious spirits of island folklore. Maybe something was inside the lighthouse and abruptly forced them out, bringing the wrath that the locals had warned about. But listen, if I'm being chased by a ghost, the last thing I'm going to be worried about is grabbing my raincoat on the way out the door. Theory 2. Others claim alien abduction. It's always aliens. The damage to the western landing was so severe that Muirhead said he wouldn't have believed it if he didn't see it with his own eyes. And this was all at 108 feet above sea level. And the grass being ripped away at 200 feet above sea level, that would have taken a colossal wave. But colossal waves do happen. Now we come to the, dare I say, more logical theories. The fuel in old lighthouses was known to cause hallucinations. So what if one of them was suffering from this, went out without his raincoat, the other 2 followed, there was some sort of altercation which Donald was known for, and maybe they all fell over the edge. One thing that I think could back this up is that weather reports and the locals said the weather was fine around those days, that there was no sign of a storm. But then why would they grab their coats, and where did all the damage come from? In reality, this is probably an Occam's razor type case. The simplest answer is probably the answer. It was probably a rogue wave like Muirhead suggested. But the weather reports from the time are really confusing. Every possibility raises new questions. The Atlantic is vast, cold, and unforgiving. Even today, the sea doesn't always return what it takes. We may never know what happened. The lighthouse itself continued operating for many decades until becoming automated in 1971. Today, no keepers live there, but it still overlooks the Atlantic, standing where it always has. The light still shines, the waves still crash against the cliffs, seabirds still circle overhead. Maybe the official explanation is exactly what happened. One terrible wave, one awful accident. Or maybe there's still one piece of the story missing, one detail that's been swallowed by the ocean. It reminds us that there are places so remote, so indifferent to human life that they can keep their secrets forever, scatter their mysteries out to sea. Alright, and that is a wrap for tonight. Thank you for coming over, and as always, if you have any strange story ideas, please feel free to comment them or send them to this email and I will get to them. And with that, I will see you next time. Good night.